Eggleston, excuse me, SERA Architects. I think probably, with the exception of Lee, I'm probably one of the oldest members in the room from CSI. Nobody? I've been with SERA Architects for 45 years. And in that time frame, I've recently, in the last 10 years, I've done Pioneer Courthouse downtown, the Nines, the Marriott Courtyard. It's down on this. I think the streets now, 6 and 0. Then worked on either Greenland or Lab. And then worked on the Collaborative Life Sciences building down on the waterfront, which we did in 37 months from the time we started our contract to the time it was finished. I'll let that sink in for a few minutes. 650,000 square feet, $211 million. So, anyway, I also started out writing specs. So Enhanced then was able to entice Russ to come join us to help take over that fun task about 7 years ago. So that's my background. I'm a longtime member, president of the Portland chapter, program chairman, and all those good things. So, and I have no intention of running again. So with that, let's turn it over to our cost estimating consultant from Ryder Levin Buckman.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Steve Kelly. As Don said, we're independent cost consultants, typically working for architects. Bid jobs, we typically just estimate them when they're being designed. So I'm paraphrasing one of your colleagues there who said, we melt dirt, we make glass. We melt dreams and make designers upset. That's kind of our job. I'm actually here from our Seattle office. I've been there for a year and a half. Before that, I was with another company called Davis Langman. And I've been in the Seattle area for 17 years. I love it here, Pacific Northwest. I love Portland. I was initially, I felt a little bit sort of, oh, me? Okay, I'll do it. All right, fair enough. So I'm really glad to be here. It's nice to meet all of you all. And it's nice to be on this distinguished panel and meet all these great estimators who share my pain. You know, I drink that Pepto-Bismol every morning. You know. So I'm glad to be here and I'm hoping for the best.
My name is Steve Clapp. I'm currently president of ASPE. So please come next week if you would. We'll have a good dinner for you and a nice show. I work for Hoffman Construction. I've been estimating 30 years or so. It's been quite a while. I kind of equate estimators in a football term as we're the linemen. We get no glory. We just get a lot of dirt, and the project managers and the architects are usually the running backs and the quarterbacks. So.
My name is Mike Reed. I'm with Market Contractors. I'm in charge of, we have a manufacturing facility, and I oversee all that. Then I've been project managing, estimating for over 25 years plus, and yeah, estimating is probably one of the most thankless jobs out there. It's never because, you know, you get things and somehow you put a number and if it works out, it's never your fault. It's always the field guys, or, you know, somebody else. It's never that lowly estimator. So hopefully I can negotiate. I'm from the manufacturing end too, so I see I have all those pains too. So maybe I can shed some light.
I'm Jim Karkin. I'm the chief estimator at Emerald Construction Company. We're a medium-sized company here in the Portland area, about annual volume in the 50 million range. And I've been doing construction-related work for 43 years. Graduated from the University of Illinois in civil engineering and construction management. Spent my first few years with my uncle's architectural firm. It gave me an interesting aspect of being able to look at plans as a result of working on those myself. Mostly a lowly draftsman. I did the finish schedules. I did all those good things that you do when you're just starting out. But I got to understand the plans and the specs just as things were starting to really change and things were being photographed and repeated and it was kind of an interesting time. But then I jumped into general contracting and started out as project manager and estimator, and then worked myself into a chief estimator position about 20, 25 years ago, and I've been in that position with 3 or 4 different companies since that time. Spent the last 7 years at Emmerich, and hopefully we'll plan to retire there too.
All right, we're ready to start. We've got about 13 questions that are already there. I've added about 3 to it, so there's about 16. First, I want to have a little fun and just, how many people in the audience work with estimators every day? Just raise your hands. Okay. How many of you supply cost information to the estimators that you hope gets used? Now, and then how many of you, I can't even read my own writing, from the architect side or the engineer side, rely on the cost estimator to help you get through the job? And my other question is, how many of you cuss out the estimators every day? Go for it. I might add that these gentlemen who do the cost estimations are your best friend on a project. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in many meetings when somebody comes in, the price is too high, the blame game goes around. You're there to solve the problem. You're not there to fix blame. You're there to say, what can we do to do it better? What do we do to look at value engineering opportunities, real value engineering opportunities, not just switching materials to get something less expensive? Because the owner looks at value engineering as wiping away parts of the program that they want to put into the building. So there's a lot of things that go on. These guys are your best friends when you're putting your estimate together. And I'll read a little later. A contract came across my desk about six weeks ago. It really kind of enlightens how important they are for public work projects. Most people don't think about it. So I'm going to start off with a real softball question. And I'll leave it up to maybe the GCs to answer the questions. How do you handle substitutions?
Okay, well, we're talking about pre-bid substitutions or post-bid substitutions?
Just says substitutions. How about both?
Well, the pre-bids are fairly straightforward as long as we can get them to the architect to review them and get his approval prior to the bid, and everybody's on the same playing field, and that's the way it should be done. I might also interject that the 1 week period prior to the bid of being allowed to have substitutions is often a little bit punitive to the subs. They haven't even started looking at the plans until at least about a week before the bid is due. So when they start thinking about substitutions, it's already too late. So I had to throw that in there just for fun. Post-bid substitutions, believe it or not, we do not want to go down that road either. Usually we're bidding a lot of hard bid projects and things that have been defined. Hopefully they bid it per plans and specs. If we find out later they haven't, that happens as well. We'll do our best to still maintain the specification that was listed and what we bid on. Generally speaking, it's always kind of a battle to try to do a post-bid substitution. We'd actually like to avoid that as well.
Okay. My product was presented, accepted, and specified, but it was not bid. Why not? That may not be a fair question to the panel, but
Yeah, I'll answer that. Yeah, a lot of times there would be a substitution before the bid, and this goes back to the subcontractors. The more complicated a bid is, especially now that we're using email, the harder it is for the sub to discern exactly what's in there. If there's like 6 or 7 addendas, they may not even look at them because of time. I mean, some of these guys, they work during the day, they're driving around their truck, and then they come home at night and do estimates. So, you know, they're pressed for time. So that can happen if you're a supplier. And what I would suggest if you are a supplier, you get it out and make some phone calls, try to find out who mechanic or whoever the contractor is that you sell to, call them direct. The GC will we're happy to give out names of bidders to supply. That's no problem.
All right. This is kind of a three-part question, but is estimating still a combination of historical documentation and artistic interpretation? Or is it now more database and electronic takeoff grounded?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah, it's funny. It really depends, of course, on the level of development you're at the design. When we're looking at fully completed construction documents, and fully loaded BIM model, then it's not solely just stripping off the quantities and applying things. It's not that, but that's a lot of it. And I think more of the art perhaps happens in the conceptual stages, when what you're doing is drawing on your experience, perhaps with the project type, but also perhaps with what you know that influences costs. The reason I mention that is that a lot of people that we work with, they surprise me by not fully appreciating what causes costs, what promotes costs, what makes buildings cost what they do. And it's generally not us. We have very little to do with that. Building configuration, site plans, all those sorts of things. They say, well, we did this high school over here, and it cost X, and you're telling me this one costs Y. And then you find yourself in this sort of, I suppose, teaching moment is the best way I can think of to describe it, where you describe why this is different from that. And that's where the artistry, the creativity comes in. Because you can't just show up here at 5 o'clock on a Friday and present this estimate. I find more often than not what you've got to do is lead them through the process by which you drew these conclusions. And it's quite often, I'm sure everyone in the panel has this experience, where you present an estimate and then the next thing you know you're sort of panel wrestling. It can't be this much, it wasn't this much before, why is it this much now? And I don't mind that, but I do wish it was more of the estimate appearing on someone's desk was more of a comma than a period, and that it led to a discussion that everyone benefited from, the designer, the contractor, and ultimately the client. So I do think a lot of what we do and what makes us good at our jobs is not counting doors, it's more about interpreting information and showing how we've interpreted that information, what we've drawn on that this made us come to this conclusion. And hopefully, at some point along the way say, no, you're wrong. That isn't actually what we intended. We intended this. And you say, okay, well, I can change that. And that can happen in a fraction of a second, and it can make a huge difference. But at least, you hope that your rationale for driving the cost conclusion is appreciated, is transparent, and can be critiqued. That's what I'm not trying, I don't think any of us here are trying to sell this estimate as the be-all, the final word of the thing. We want as much as anything to get your feedback on it and make it better. And that's what we do with Hoffman and everyone else up here is, we reconcile, we come in with 2 estimates, we create 2 better estimates, I hope, after the reconciliation process. So I do think, that's part of the job, certainly, that I enjoy, is this sort of creative aspect of it. And if you, as a designer, haven't worked on this type of project before, maybe we can show you something, teach you something you didn't know before, and make your building better for the client.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I have a little bit of a question there. You made mention of maybe you understand what goes into it to make the cost estimate come out. As a subcontractor, and I'm presenting a bid to you, if I'm looking through the specifications, through the documents, and I see visible holes, the project, or maybe I believe I understand the design intent, and I see like, well, if we added a couple more features here or there, I believe this is what they're trying to achieve, although they haven't fully specified it. I personally feel a little bit torn where I think this is where they're going. I like to articulate that, but I know if I include my bid's going to be higher, and I have a fear that my competitor is going to come in lower bid than me, and I'm going to get brushed off the table.
Well, I have to be fair, I mean, I'm not in the situation of taking bids and recycling contracts. You know, that's not my job. But I know that anything that I can do to educate the entire design team, the entire project team, to make better decisions, I appreciate. It makes us look smarter. And certainly, our job as independent cost consultants is not to count the doors, it's to interpret the intent. So if all we do is count the doors and count the fixtures, then we're going to be wrong. And the design contingency only goes so far. But I don't know, Steve, what do you think about the specific question about subs?
If it's a hard bid, you go for the jugular. I mean, it's you know, if it's set up that way, then to cover all the bases, you're never going to get the job. You have to go bid what's on the document strictly, and that's it. Because, I mean, if you miss something, the architect and owner, they're going to hold you to it. So if they miss something, well, still not that.
Is that perhaps where is there a strategy in, you know, officially asking for clarification on those types of things? Is that
Oh, yeah.
any recommendations on that?
I mean, if you're a responsible company, I would try to get some questions in, even if it's a day or two before the bid. And, you know, we'll forward them to the architect, but there's not much they can do at that time. But at least we're trying to say, hey, you know, there's a problem, this is it, you know, and then, but we have to bid by the documents. That's what we're instructed to do.
We take that further in terms of whether it's a private job or a public job. In a private job, we like it a bit of like it says, but if you have those two things that you know that this is what they're asking for, we like to have that as like an unsolicited alternate or an adder to the project, so we can then transfer that on to the architect, to the owner, to whoever we're bidding to at that moment. As in a private setting where we've got that flexibility. In a public setting, we don't. But in a public setting, if we've got that going in and we are apparently the low bidder or even a second bidder sometimes, if they're over budget, things like that kind of information right out the gate before we can get some of that to turn around and actually make awards based on some things. So I would encourage you to bid per the plans and specs, but feel free to add things. Make sure you list them as unsolicited alternates, not alternates, because we do have formal alternates, and you would be surprised in the heat of the battle how many times people took an unsolicited alternate and thought it was the main alternate, and we put in a number that wasn't what it was supposed to be.
So I'd add to that one thing, that when you're looking at these jobs, it's a difference between a hard bid, so it's a design, bid, build. And in those cases, it's mostly for a public agency. They have their rules and regulations that you have to follow. They have substitution requests you have to make. They have asking your questions during addenda periods to get everything answered by addenda. And that's when the timing gets very critical. And having done a lot of answering, doing addendas, that's where you try to look at what you do, getting it out to subcontractor on mechanical, electrical items, and what changed. I think one of the other differences is when you're doing a design build and you're working for the contractor, it's a much different deal from the design professional and also from your case, so you're all in this together. I mean, if nobody, you want to point the finger, it goes around the circle on the table. And then, the whole idea of the integrated project delivery is you're all sitting at the table putting together what is the best solution to the problem for the client. That's why you're starting to see a lot of movement to design, build, and integrated delivery away from hard bid. But a lot of public agencies, and this is my viewpoint, a lot of public agencies still have what I call the bean counter mentality. It's like ODOT wants to count every piece of gravel you're going to put out on the road. So it depends on the delivery method, depends on, you know, who the contractors are, and, you know, do not submit as an alternate. I mean, that, I've seen that in more cases where somebody put a number together, and you look at it, bid open, it's like, they didn't get it. I don't understand what it was. Yeah.
I can just add a different dimension to what Steve and Jim said to answer your question. The scope letter is crucially important to the general contractor. But get it to them before bid day. They don't have time to read it on bid day. And you don't have to give dollars in there, but just say it's missing this, it's missing that in your bid. Then they have a way of addressing it, and that's something they may be able to bring up in negotiations with the owner after the war too.
Okay. Excuse me, I'm going to add to the question that was there a minute ago, and that's the issue about the historical data. I'm going to change it a little bit because right now, given as busy as everybody is historical data even useful in putting estimates together if you don't have the manpower out there to do the work?
Yeah,
everybody's saying, well, what happens down the line? So it used to be a lot of people relied on the historic data. You do the takeoffs, you apply it, there's a number, but that's not the case in this day and age. Right?
No, it really isn't, and it can only be, and maybe only ever should be, a reasonable back check against the conclusions that you derive through your takeoff and through your price research. And even then, I think you have to consider each project on its merits too, because it's something of a beauty parade out there just now, and if there's an easier way for contractors and subcontractors to make money than the one that you presented to them via this project, then you have to take that into account. I remember 2005, 2004, our estimates were reaching a bottom line and then adding a sort of bid contingency onto the bottom of that too. And it's so unsatisfying to do that because it seems like it seems sort of ill-considered. It seems like everything you've done until that point meant nothing until you laminated this final sort of 10 or 15% on top of it. And that is quite unsatisfying as an estimator to go through all that work and then say, this is our number. Well, you know, but it's hard to do much other than that, really, at least in be convincing. Again, it's one of these things where if there's any alternative to putting an estimate in front of a client or an owner or a designer at 5 o'clock on a Friday, which I know I've done, then find a way to sort of sit and go through your assumptions, convince them that you've done the job that needs to be done, but then say, your project in this market is really not, you know, Miss America. I don't know what other Miss it may be, but you know, it's not the one that everyone's going to go for, that makes them the most money in the shortest amount of time. And you have to account for that somewhere or another. I mean, I don't know how you do that, Steve, but you know, it's not great, it's quite imperfect, but it's often necessary because the bottom line is the bottom line.
Any comments? This next one ties into the comment you had. It's a rather long question, but let me read it in its entirety. Labor is in high demand right now with all the projects going on. Some projects have seen an increase in cost of 20% due to the lack of labor. How do you take that into account in estimating a project? I don't know what you said a minute ago. And is there a way to account for what for that when doing a pre-design estimate 2 years before the project goes out to bid? Stunned silence.
It is very hard to predict what's going to happen labor-wise 2 years down the road, or even what happened 2 years ago. I mean, we work nationally. I hear it all the time. How can this project can't cost this much over here? There's just no way. Well, people in Houston, Texas don't make. I mean, the cost of living for one is people in Texas. You can buy 200 acre ranch for $200,000, and you can get, you know, a lot here for $200,000 with no house. labor costs drive project costs up. And it's very, everybody wants to make more money, so it's hard to, it's very hard.
Yeah, I mean, the single biggest determinant, as far as I can tell, of what project costs is not that you have some exotic hardwood specified, or you know, you're bringing you know, some newfangled glass, you know, that's sort of dimmable electronically and all of that. The one factor that controls costs over everything is competition. And if you're in a market like we have just now, and you can't get 3 bidders on any scope, whether it's a subcontractor scope or general contractor scope, you kind of have to take what the market tells you it can give you. I mean, that's it's problematic, and as I said, it goes back to that question about lumping some big modifier onto the bottom of your estimate. But I don't think there's anything that we as estimators or you as designers or specifiers can do about it. If it's a hot market with so much work out there that you can pick and choose the best projects, and the best project doesn't necessarily mean the most iconic project if you're a designer. It might mean that, you know, the guy who's getting paid piecework, a drywaller, can get in, make his money, get out of that job and on to the next one the fastest. And that, none of us here have any control over that whatsoever.
You want to add to that?
Well, yeah, we see that, especially now in this market, when we see the specialty projects or the tough renovations or the projects that are phased where you have to do this part of the building first and then leapfrog over the next part, and it drags on, and it's a lot of high overhead kind of things. We get very little competition in the sub-trades for that, because there are so many other nice projects out there that are high production, that are easy, like you say, get in there and get out and go and go on to the next one. And you've got better markups at that point too. So the way we handle that at the end of most projects is we present a schematic design or design development level is a contingency line. And it's archaic in a sense, but it's the best we can come up with.
Yeah. And question?
Yeah. Oftentimes when we estimate, we do a lot of CMGC projects. So we'll sit across the table from a Hoffman or an Emmerich or whoever at the milestone phase and we'll reconcile our design estimates. You know, and as a CMGC, you guys have your approved pool of subs. You know, you have everybody that's feeding you pricing. But then bid day comes and it turns out of your pool of qualified subs, only one wants to take a stab at it. We're seeing this more and more with the volatility of the market and the market pressure on subs. You know, GCs are getting input, cost input from subs, but then come bid time, we're going to go take job X, or maybe we're not going to bid this time. And so we're seeing these massive bid busts right at the end of the project. It's a huge sticker shock to the owner. What mechanisms and what check does a GC have to forecast for that, to account for that? How do you get out ahead of your subs and figure out, okay, you're feeding me cost information now in March, but in August, are you actually going to bid this? And, you know, not necessarily is this number going to be good, because it always evolves as the design goes on, but how do you account for that market volatility at the milestone estimating phase, knowing that you may not get the sub coverage at buyout that you maybe have anticipated?
Well, the first thing we do when we contact some of our subs to help us in this process is we do make that initial question, and it's got to be yes, and there's no backing out. We're not paying them, they know that, but they're doing it as a service to us and also to get in on the door as well. If they're not interested in 4 to 5 months later on, they'll not be interested at the moment we're asking them. So, but what you do, you have to groom them, you have to stay with them, and usually it's not just a single moment at the schematic design level, you bring them along at the design development level, maybe at the 50% CD level. So you could start to sense if there is a reason for them pulling out. And that's kind of being proactive. We have to just stay on top of them and make sure that doesn't happen. But the other side of that is, yes, we in fact only guaranteed at least one guy that's looking at it. So we have to go out and really beat the bushes and get into our invitation to bid system and get them out to as many people as we can and generate that interest. And that's part of the job of being a CMGC is to building. So we don't get these busts. And that takes quite a bit of effort, quite a bit of phone calls, quite a bit of coercing, and trying to twist a few arms as well. But it's part of this process. And you're right. If we don't get that, we're going to get some busts.
One thing I just want to add was the relational aspect. The old thing of using the phone and going out to lunch and going and visiting these people really pays off. I know, I'm sorry, but the younger generation likes to send emails, and that's cool. But a lot of it is phone calling. And the other aspect, I've worked for some bigger GCs where you take off everything. I mean, architecturally, you got to make sure you have your MEP trades covered. But I mean, you're taking doors off and masonry and wood and roofing and everything to make sure that if something like that happens, you can react. You'll know how many square feet of block you've got, and you can make a change. Because if you don't, I mean, you're just dead in the water. Really, you have no bullets, and it can just you can throw in your bed and just say, I don't know.
I would add to this comment, excuse me, the relationships you develop with the GCs or the mechanical engineers, the electrical engineers, and designers goes a long way. I mean, I can probably tell which subs are going to be in which jobs by knowing the relationships that they have with different general contractors, which is good and bad, but it does happen. So I think, and trust plays into that a lot. So if you are going to give them a price in May, and you may not be doing it in August, if you know that in June, pick up the phone and tell them. I mean, it's better to know sooner rather than later, and then wind up with a big surprise as you go on. Before I move on to these other questions, any other general questions here we want to? Yes.
What do you think about the practice of general contractors going out and asking for a rebid after the project's been assigned?
After the project's been what?
What do you think about the practice of general contractors going back and ask for a rebid from their subcontractors or suppliers after the project has been assigned to them?
After it's been assigned to them. So they're parallel bidding. We think that is important, and we do not do that at Emmerich. And it happens out there. We hear the stories from the subs all the time. So all we can do is monitor our own company, and we hear about it from other subs, and we keep that in mind as the bidding strategy when we watch against other bidders that we're bidding against. But beyond that, there's not much we can do other than just keep our own scores going.
Want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I agree. It's unethical. It just flat out is. But I know a lot of general contractors did it all the time. I worked at the Southeast for years in Florida, and it is really cutthroat there. We would bid, these are multi-million-dollar jobs, and the chief estimator would be cutting right there and then to come up with a number. And then they would call you 20 minutes after the bid and say, I had to cut $500,000 out of your bid, will you take the job? Take it or leave it right now. So that was the environment that they lived in, and that's not ethical. I mean, it isn't, but that's the way business was done over there.
Is there any legal ability for a subcontractor to bind to a contractor with the general before he receives a bid or before the bid is accepted? And you reimburse the contractor, subcontractor general?
I don't think so.
I don't think there's a precedent there. There's too many variables, I think. It's been a proposal from the sub to the GC, and until the GC actually accepts it, then it's legal. We proposed it, and we're taking it under advisement, but I think the legal position is until we react to it and either Although I think that's part of what's gone on with the first tier disclosures in the last few years. The state of Oregon anyway, and even Washington has requested generals to turn in a first tier disclosure of, I think it's 5% of the general contractor's bid. Anybody over 5% has to turn in a sub name and the dollar amount for that particular sub. When we do that, there is, I'm sure, legal course.
I would agree with that. I mean, there are some situations we've had where we've actually asked for a listing of some of the subcontractors depending on, you know, if it's a lot of woodwork, millwork work that wants to be done, we want to make sure we're getting a subcontractor that's qualified. You can do the same thing on MEPs, and that's actually listed as part of the bid. And then to make the change, you have to go through the legal process of then going to the owner and saying, well, why do you want to make this change from X to Y? And that gets it on the table. Any other questions before we move on? Yes.
I run into a lot of projects where the project comes out to bid after the time for the substitution request has been approved. How would the general contractors, like the subcontractors, suppliers, approach that?
To what? For us to publish it?
Yeah, if the project has come out for bid and you get into the substitution request and you're already past the point of the substitution request and you can't do a substitution request,
Okay.
what would your advice be to a supplier or general contractor at that point?
Like Jim mentioned it before, turn in your scope letter ahead of time and just say, and be honest, just say, I couldn't get this product substituted or submitted on time, but there is an alternate and you could save $20,000.
Yeah, go ahead and submit it, but make sure it's clear that it's not per plans and specs. And so then we can take that after the fact, depending on bid results, and work with it.
Other questions before I move on to some of the set questions? Yes.
Talk a little bit about information age, about email versus relationships. What's your most favorite tools that you have now, and what are your most favorite tools that you guys had 25 years ago?
Last week.
Last
Last week would be okay.
Yeah.
Well, I remember the first time I heard a fax tone on the phone, I was like, what is that? Jim, what are you using over at Emmerich now for this solicitation?
Well, the bid solicitation, it's a CAN program. It's a Smart Bid Net is a system that we use, and it sets up all the invitations and sets out addendas and notices and memos if we need to. It's gone beyond that. It'll actually receive proposals. We haven't quite we got the subcontracting community to answer to that as well. But it's very powerful that way. But generally speaking, the quantity takeoff is now getting on screen, and those are great. It gets you the quantities faster. I'm not a fan of the overall ability to do a takeoff entirely by the screen. It's great if you kind of compartmentalize your takeoffs and you have people helping you, and you have them work on this area, and this guy does the concrete, this guy does the framing, and that sort of thing. But I'm too much old school in terms of wanting to turn those pages and go back and forth several times and figure out exactly what's going on with the access, what's going on with the area that we're working on, and be able to kind of put the production factors to it. And so I think it works really well if you're trying to get a lot of quantities stripped off, either schematic design or design development levels, and you can get those done really quick, and then it comes to us and basically do the massaging and getting the costing put together. But in terms of the overall product, I'm still not sold on it. I certainly don't want it because it gets things done faster. I don't see that. I see it getting things done more accurately, and that's great. But I don't know that if we get everybody 20% faster and getting 20% more estimates, I think the accuracy is going to start to fall again. So I'm comfortable with how much we put out, where we put it out, but I like the accuracy and certainly not having 14 or 15 pages of multiplication to do 2 or 3 hours before the bid time. I don't miss that bit.
Steve, you want to add to that?
Yeah, in the bid solicitations, there's one thing, you can contest for this, how many bid solicitations do you get a day?
Oh, probably 25 or 50. Sometimes, I mean, it's crazy, because there's so many out there. There's like Square Foot, there's Blue Book,
Right.
there's Smart Bid. I mean, and some guys have their favorites, but there's still, I mean, there's new ones there. Paragon or something like that.
So,
Building connected.
so as a general contractor, you think, oh, I emailed all these people and they're gonna look at it, look at my job. No, that's not the case, because they do, they get so many that they're just like, and they may pick one or two, and that's it. And this is where it goes back to the phone calls, is if you don't call, they're not gonna pick it out. So there's so many times I've called and said, hey, are you gonna look at a job? Oh, well, when did you send it? And then they find it, and, oh yeah, I'll do it. So that makes a big difference.
As a sub too, sometimes it's nice to get a call from a contractor where they've actually looked at the plans and said, hey, this has a good scope for you, you might want to look at it, versus just, I mean, so many people send out invites and I'll call them, like, they'll call and I'll be like, well, is there a lot of millwork? Is there a lot of case work? Oh, I don't know. I just sent you the bid invite. I just need to know if you're bidding or not.
Yeah.
So, I mean, probably not gonna tend to swing, cater towards that. But if somebody's really interested in getting a bid from you, it's always better to hear from them versus getting an invite where you either click, yes, I will bid, no, I won't bid, or they won't click at all. And they just delete it.
Do you get any project invitation where they have a really good project narrative with like a site logistics plan? You can understand how the job's going to be built.
That's always helpful, scope letters.
Yeah.
I try to do scope letters when I can. I mean, that's all goes back to, if every job is negotiated, that would be great. If every job is design build, it would be great. But there's a world of hard bids and 3 bids, and some people will do crazy numbers just to get a job. But the more information, the better.
Question?
We have a question from one of our CSI members in California on Twitter. Evan wants to know, what effect does a project labor agreement have on project costs and diversity of bids?
That's your company.
You guys.
Well, labor agreements have to be adhered to, and usually they cost more than going out on the public.
Is it more steady for you, though, to put the estimate together because you know what to count on?
Yeah, yeah,
But it's going to cost more.
yeah, it will cost more. Because your cost per hour for your labor is going to be more.
Let me add one thing to that. We had a PLA, Howard has tried to have a PLA with an 80th agreement of WAF. It was negotiated. And it was one of 10 ERA-funded projects in the United States that had a PLA. And they did it here because they wanted cost certainty. They also wanted to make sure they were going to get the staffing they needed to do the work. So with that comes commitments. The other way, you may be paying more, but you're sure of getting the staff and the people you need to get the job done, because the ERA-funded projects had a ticking clock that you had to be done by a certain date or you lose the money. Any other questions from anybody before we move on?
One back here.
Yeah.
From conceptual design or schematic design to construction documents, what is something that designers don't design but has a huge cost impact between those two when you're doing cost estimating? Like, what would be the top 5 things that you would say, hey, if you had designed this earlier, the cost would be more accurate, so the owner isn't shocked later in the process?
I'd say probably the entire, you know, the entire MEP design. I mean, as you probably know, you know, the architectural design is at the vanguard. You know, it's the cutting edge, and everything else sort of streams in behind like the commentary of it. And so I think I don't necessarily want that to happen. I don't necessarily want everyone to be on the same page at the same date, because everyone learns from what precedes them. But certainly, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, bring that stuff up to entirely to speed with where the architecture was at, and then our job becomes much easier. Or, shameless plug, employ someone like us, someone like Sal. I don't see any others who knows that stuff inside out and can anticipate what's going to happen next. I mean, that's, as I say, we talked earlier on about the artistry, the creativity, if you like, associated with estimating, which not a lot of people, I think, perceive in what we do. I don't blame them necessarily, but if you're able to help a designer complete the design, at least in your head, and display that on paper and an estimate for them to review and critique, then you're doing everyone a favor.
One of the things we do is we also, when you start over, you might have a concept design, and you go into schematic design, design development. CDs, if you're using that approach versus integrated project delivery, where you might be doing criteria design, detail design, and implementation drawings, we put in a design contingency. So it might be as much as 20% at the start, and then as you get more information down, you narrow that, you take that down as you're developing more information. And we look for our consultants to add anything on the MEP side, anything on the structural side. I mean, you'd be amazed how many people argue over how much red iron goes into the project. And you literally want to do takeoffs for that as it goes forward. So, yeah. Any other questions before I kind of move on? Yeah.
For that early preliminary costing, what's the most effective process that you see for coordinating and typing up the energy model? Since you're really trying to decide which MEP systems to use and everything all at once.
Well, I mean, typically we don't do that. We react to people like you. Our, for example, they do their own energy modeling and they're informing us, and we're giving them almost like the cost consequences of each version. So I think in that case we're more reactive, more passive than active. But just to go back to what we were talking about earlier on there, and you mentioned, Don, too, about this assignment of contingency. I think I'd be a lot more comfortable with contingency if it was assigned by discipline or by component or something like that, because again, like I said earlier on, I hate this. We log this big contingency onto the bottom of an estimate we spent so much time thinking about, and then we hope for the best. And I think we'd all be a little bit smarter and better served if we assigned contingency to the components they actually require more than others. So instead of having 15% a concept design, it should be 25% on the mechanical scope and maybe 15% on the architectural scope and 10% on the structural. I'm making those numbers up, obviously, but we'd all be a lot smarter, and our conclusions would be a lot better if we did something more refined than just adding 15% at the bottom, because everyone looks at that and say, that's mine. And these guys say, no, that's mine actually. And everyone grabs for it at the same time, and before you know it, and this is pretty typical, it's gone. And you actually haven't improved anyone's outcome at all. You just grab the contingency.
I just want to add something to that is, if you're in schematic stage and you're moving ahead, I would really try to convince an owner to put out a RFP to mechanical, electrical, plumbing subs and get them on board early. A lot of companies now, they have their own engineers, they're very smart, they do this thing all day long, and they'll come up with solutions that a design firm, I'm talking about a mechanical design firm, may never think of. Because the closer you get to the guy that is actually doing the work is where the real money can be saved. They know what goes in fast and quick. And if you can get their input into your design, you're well ahead of the game.
In doing that on, say, fast track projects, where you actually do have the MEP on board, the critical part of the project is to keep it moving. So you're really dependent on the estimates in order to be able to continue to do the documents that you need to do without forging ahead and then finding out you're over budget and then coming back and have to redo the documents. Do you have any avenues for speeding up that process to get that information back, turned around and back to the architect so that they can continue with the design process?
Then you're getting into the integrated design concepts, where you've got people that are concentrating on that particular project, and they're probably bigger projects. But,
Yeah, not even that. I mean, they're concentrating on specific disciplines within those projects too. Because, you know, the typical traditional methodology is that, you know, we're brought in at milestones and we estimate everything. So you see what happens there is you get to this point where you've expended all this energy and we come back after 3 or 4 weeks and tell you the answer is Y, not X. And then you have to spend 3 weeks of high stress activity coming to a different conclusion. And it'd be much better if instead of this sort of approach where you stop here, do this, and move on, and you know, regret at your leisure sort of thing, if you could take one discipline here, one discipline here, one discipline here. But of course, that sort of scenario is not familiar to a lot of clients, and it's also more intensive in terms of their input, which translates into higher costs. So you have to be convincing your argument to your client this is of long-term benefit, because even though, you know, they might look at, and estimating is very much a commodity, you know, and just like, we operate with one guy operating out of his basement, we operate against guys who are multinational, and you know, it's just like, I mean, it's not quite as intense as you know, subs and generals are in their markets, but we have to compete with people generally most of the time. And we can propose that sort of approach where it's sort of an ongoing check-in process as opposed to waiting for things to come to a conclusion. But at first glance, it doesn't always make sense to people who don't see the long-term benefits of, you know, making the process work as opposed to reacting to emergencies that occur every 3 months. So it's kind of a balancing act. I mean, I would love to do that. I would love to be involved in the architect's office, looking over their shoulder, telling them to erase that line and go back and do this one. But it's a difficult, and it has to be a large project with a relatively sophisticated client. But even then, I mean, they have their own financial pressures too, so it's actually quite a difficult sell. I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense, of course, but yeah, it's a hard thing to make stick, honestly, in most projects.
You know, one thing, most reps for materials, they love to come to your office and they want to sell you their stuff. And they usually are very helpful and they will steer you in the right direction. If you're sitting down doing a finish schedule that has a carpet and tile and all that, call these guys, because they'll save you time. You know, because you might say, wow, I really like this nice tile that I saw on the internet, it's really cool. But then you find out, wow, it's 2,500 square foot, and, you know, that's crazy, I'm not going to do that. So instead of speccing it and then finding out later it's expensive, try to get some reps. Yeah. I mean, like down millwork, I mean, it can be a perfect example. You could sit them down and say, okay, well, I want it to kind of look like this, and then take it right off and run with it. Say, well, we can do this and that. You know, you don't want to use sell and service because it's really expensive. Why don't you do this? So,
And one of the things I was gonna say is when we did Edith Green, we had the cost estimator with us in Edith Green every day. And we go up and ask them questions. We had the electrical subcontractor, we had the mechanical subcontractor, we had the demolition subcontractor, we had the elevator subcontractor. All there, on site, to ask questions, and they were also told, if you don't know what's behind the wall, it's your responsibility to go open the wall up and see what's there, so you can't later say, oh, I didn't look in that room, or I didn't look behind that area when you're doing renovation. That job also had to have a GMP done within 4 months of the general contractor coming on board. So, it's a different, design, bid, build, we have long schedules, and a much different process than these faster jobs. We're going more to design, build, we're going more to integrated delivery, and the time frames are getting compressed. Be mindful of our time, yes.
So what, I'll smile when they say this so you don't dislike me. So what are you as estimators doing to help the rest of us understand how these costs are calculated? I mean, I actually worked at Emmerich Construction once, a long time ago, but most design professionals don't have a lot of exposure on what happens on a bid day and how these numbers get crunched. What are you as individuals or as an organization or ASPE doing to help the rest of us understand this better so we can meet you halfway in the process?
Well, a lot of firms like us and contractors, like these guys are employing CAD and BIM managers. And, because everyone thinks this is the holy grail of estimating, our typical metric might be we spend 80% of our time measuring and 20% of our time pricing. And BIM seems like an obvious way to invert that and make our prices better and our clients' outcomes better too. But if we don't educate our design partners on how to best populate these models so that we can then extract what we need from them, then no one's anywhere near where they ought to be. They're not further ahead, we're not further ahead. We can't use the information that's in a BIM model or we can't rely on it. So I think if, as I say, we have this, I'm pretty sure Hoffman has it, I don't know the other guys here, but educating our design clients about not how to build a model, but how to build a model with information that we can readily extract and use and rely on. That's, I think, where we go towards them and rely less on luck and educate them on this is how we need you to enter this information so we can create abstracts and schedules from your BIM model. That's one of the ways we can do it, at least I think.
Yeah. Go ahead. I think what helps is a lot of checking price, lead times, and a lot of times a designer will spec in my world a material, say they see a small little 3x3 piece of something and go, oh, that would look great all the way down that wall. But I don't want any seams in it. But the material becomes in 6x6 pieces. So then, it's just more knowledge on materials they're speccing, the availability, and the usages of it. Because just because they draw a pretty picture and they find it in a book and they want it on that wall, doesn't mean that it can go on that wall and that the client can afford it. Because a lot of times they forget that it's the magnitude of some of these materials and things they spec.
Well, in defense of specifiers, and remind I'm emerging, while a concrete guy gets to worry about the concrete, we have to specify every little piece and part of that building. There is no human being on the planet, I don't care how smart you are, or how experienced you are, or how in tune with the industry you are, that can possibly begin to know all of that. We don't get to focus in just one area. And so I'm
can
looking
rely
for
on
more.
subs. They can rely on their subs more, people that are in this world every day.
Thank you.
It helps you. Help me help you. I want a job. I want to do as good his job as a contractor or a client, owner's rep, I mean, and I need work for the people to go home and have a job to do.
So I'll see you at the rest of our meetings, so. Right?
Well, nobody knows everything, but it's, it helps.
I was gonna add a couple things to what was said, and that, one of the things we are relying on is the basis of design document that gets put together up front. So you're putting on paper what may not be shown on the drawings. And we've also done jobs where we've used our building information model compared against the hand takeoffs that some estimators still use, or feel comfortable doing it the way you want to do it. And we've come out plus or minus 10% on quantities. And the key to that is setting up the model so it has the attributes the estimators need to take off. So a punched window is a different piece of the Revit model than a piece of herd wall. So you don't have to say, well, you got X amount of window, and you might have 5 different window types. So, got a question back there?
I was thinking about the core of Teresa's question. What are you doing to educate the architects, designers, whoever else is in the business, on how to prepare information for you to be faster, be better, or streamlined to estimate? And so I was thinking about CSI, and they have their certification programs to try to produce better specifiers and certify them. Are there programs in your organization that attempt to do that for estimators, and can other people attend those meetings or those classes or whatever?
That's a great idea. No, it really is.
It's like diving engineering.
Well, yeah, but like at ASPE, we have presentations similar to what you guys do, and all kinds of interesting subjects in that. But one of our creed is about education, and that's something that we can definitely improve upon. You know, a lot of us are not just estimators, there's project managers and people from Washington County and that. But yeah, that's something between CSI and ASPE. There should be a collaboration between us that we can learn from each other. Yeah, we have a program called Certified Professional Estimators, and they have to go through a process. You got to write a paper and take an 8-hour-long test, and you have to have experience. So there's only about 2,500 of them in the U.S. right now, but that's part of the education aspect. But then what's happening now in the industry, it's really interesting, is there's just this, it used to be so separate. It used to be contractors and subs and architects, and we all get together and have a brawl, basically. Yeah, you know, through a project. And now it's getting away from all that. We're trying to work with each other and relate to each other. So, you know, I hope in the future it's going to get away from that.
I think that, I mean, I've been around long enough, so I know I've seen some change, but I think that if your organization would develop a presentation or a seminar or something like what Don was talking about, how to address a project at its onset at the beginning, and how architects can understand what their decisions do to affect the cost of a project or at the early stages. I think that would be
yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we're going to do something on that.
I've got 4 more questions I'm going to ask, being mindful of time. And I'll just cherry pick the ones that are left, so bear with me. Is there a difference between putting together the design cost estimate and the actual construction estimate? What factors could lead to differences between the two?
Well, there's usually very much difference between the two. And it's kind of my mantra on this whole thing is the devil's in the details. And at the early stages of the conceptual the design development, we don't have details. So I try to document so we have details, and try as we may to understand what the architect is telling us that the wainscot on that wall is going to look like as it goes down the corridor, until we get the contract documents and realize that it's going to be not a straight line, it looks like the ocean. and the sales rep that came in and told me it was only $2 a square foot for the material because he wants to sell that product to the architect. There's another process.
Get on the spec.
And get in the spec, it finds out the product is actually $10 a square foot. And then you have this waste factor, and then you have these trims that you never even thought was going to be trimmed out. All of the detail is what adds up into that cost, and probably is just part of the whole process as we start at the beginning, and that 10% contingency that we don't have to throw at the end is what we try to interpret architecturally, what maybe experience we had with that architect. And that's where the artistic part of estimating comes in. At that point, we've done work with other architects, and there are architectural firms that, as we look at their process, we're going to say, hey, watch out. We know these guys really get artistic, and they really like the interior of the trim better, but there's just things that we know about certain architects after working with them. So that we try to anticipate those kind of detail changes and the cost impact because of that.
Okay. Here's one that we've all faced. What is the best way to tell an owner the project is going to cost way more than they were expecting?
Would you guys do that?
We all do that.
Yeah. Well, I know that, as I said earlier, it's one of these situations where you tend to know better what not to do than what to do. You know, because if you throw the estimate over the fence at 5 o'clock on a Friday and hope for the best, that doesn't work. So I think there's a sort of, as again I mentioned earlier, an educational process here of explaining why you've come to this conclusion. It may be some quirk in the specification, it may be something in the geometry of the building, but and it's usually several of those things combined together. But if we leave it to the point where here's your estimate, all the best, it's been nice knowing you, we've done a very poor job, and I think. Don't mistake this for, I think that when you give us a job and give us 3 weeks to do it, that we should be telling you every Tuesday where we're heading and how it's going to trend, because we don't know that. We won't know that for a while. But I think at the end of the process, make sure that you, if you're the designer, have several days to absorb the content of our document and resist the temptation to go to page 7 where the summary is and actually look at pages 1 through 6 which describe how you came to those conclusions. And as I say, it's amazing to me, and I'm not being critical here, I really am not. It's amazing to me when you talk to designers, particularly architects, in describing the 3-dimensional component of an estimate and how much, say, exterior cladding affects the bottom line cost. It's amazing how often they have failed to grasp that before it actually happens. If you think about a one-story building, it has a certain exterior wall to floor ratio, and that changes when that same building, the same square footage, becomes 2 stories or 3 stories, and that changes too when it's built on a hillside or in some remote location, or if you're trying to laminate as opposed to integrate, say, a lead point into the project. So if you fail to go through that process, that educational process, or the sum of the parts sort of description, then you fail to inform your client about what actually makes the difference to the cost and why it's. And you're bringing it upon yourselves. Whatever you reap what you sow. If you fail to do that, you should expect to be, raped over the coals and hell. And everyone's accountable. But if you fail to educate the people who are receiving this information, who are counting on it, who've made a business decision to go this route, they ought to know why it costs $750 a square foot instead of 500 or 250. And if you haven't gone through that process and just say, here's the estimate, it's been nice knowing you, then we haven't done a job. I mean, estimating isn't coming to the bottom line, it's interpreting information and then it's reflecting it back and communicating it to the people who are paying for it, after all. And as much as anything, it's helping people come, inform people about the decisions they've made. We don't cause costs, I'll say that again. The decisions they've made that have led to this cost. And if you haven't been able to do it beforehand, you certainly have to do it afterwards, whenever you're dealing with this colossal mess that you're creating. We walk into rooms, right? And people are downcast even before we've opened their mouths. We're the professional buzz killers, honestly. It's a desperate state of affairs. I wish it was something else. I was like, sure, ER, surgeon or something, I could just walk in and say to the I wish I could do that. I never really get to do that. But if you can explain, well, this is why we've come to this conclusion. And please react to it now, while you're at DD, as opposed to waiting and hoping for the best, and then finding that actually we might have been a wee bit low then. So.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I would just like to add that we're providing a service, a valuable service, and when we come to that situation where we know we're over budget, we don't just come and present it. We try to provide the alternates or what we see as the reasons why we're up here. But we also do that even if we're on budget. We need to even look at the possibility that things could actually be done cheaper even though we're within budget. So we're trying to give other alternatives and other thoughts and keep the process and the juices flowing.
Okay. Moving on. As a general contractor, what is one thing you wish subcontractors would do in their bids? One thing, for the sake of time.
All right, no question. Make your number really big. Because I've had them where
the font, not the Bible.
Yeah, the font. I've looked at scopes and it's like, where's the price? Oh, it's buried in the paragraph right there. We're in a competitive bid environment. It's like the papers are coming. At Emmerich, which I used to work at, we had 4 fax machines running, and they were running, and work going through paper so fast, and you have to be able to see.
I'd say it's something similar to that in terms of putting all your information on one sheet of paper, not 2, not 3, and not having your terms and conditions going 4 or 5 pages, and then 7 or 8 pages of recent projects that we just did to match this project. When the bid number is on the first page, and right now we need to concentrate on the numbers. We'll worry about the references and things later. And if we choose you, we'll handle that at some other time. But, it's amazing the amount of fluff you get besides the bid. It's a speed thing.
So now, for the subcontractor, here's this question. As a subcontractor, what is one thing you would change about the way general contractors solicit bids?
To not look just at that big number. I wish you would read all the stuff on the first page that says how I got to that. Because so often, my proposals aren't, unless it's a big project, usually the numbers are all on page. But so many times, I wish they'd just flip through it and scope it.
Right.
Apples to apples, not apples to oranges. We've all heard that. There's no way somebody can be half of what everybody else is and it'd be the same thing.
Yeah.
Just no way.
Is there a question there? Draw attention to that?
To what?
When is there any kind of way for JC to draw their attention to that scope of, devils in the details, and if my competitor can beat me by $15, how do I draw attention to the value that I've created? other than just that big, large number that you want?
So I would send your scope letter in a day or two ahead of time at least, and make a phone call if you see something that's weird.
I love to do scope letters.
Yeah.
And I give them to you and I say, hand it to everybody. Send it to all the other 5 bidders.
Yeah.
At least the world bidding the same thing. But you never know if, I never know for sure if that's going to get published. I mean, that's the bad thing. You can spend all the time, and I can help somebody, and I can make you understand, oh, the drawings are only 50%, but here's all the stuff that's missing, and do that. But that information still has to get to all the other sub-bidders, because if they don't see it, if they don't know that it's not there, they're still going to bid only what they see.
Yeah.
So,
Last ask for questions, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
I guess I'm so low on the totem pole in the supply chain, I'm down in the creosote part. But as a 3rd or 4th tier supplier, I'm not supplying numbers to you as a subcontractor. I'm supplying it to a fabricator who supplies you. We melt your right? My question to you is, we've asked what do you think an architect should do, what do you think a subcontractor should do. Many of us in this room are 3rd or 4th tier suppliers, and yet when we are working with architects, we are constantly asked, well, how much more am I going to pay for this and that? And I try and maintain an understanding of what the glazing subcontractor is going to price it to you as the general, so I can give them some relative numbers. But it's always a challenge because, as you mentioned, the devil's in the detail, and it can swing. I was talking to one of my counterparts here, not in my industry, but we could have a 75% fluctuation depending on the details. What would you advise the people, the clients you're dealing with, and the architects you're dealing with, design build or even consulting, to do with people like myself who are 3rd tier suppliers? Because they're always asking, what's the cost? And I understand why they're asking the cost, but I'm concerned about the wide fluctuation and how it affects what you're ultimately doing. And that's a very nebulous question. I'm sorry, I can't make it more precise.
Well,
help.
One thing is, from the general contractor and the architecture, you should identify things that have a lot of volume or area. You got roofing, ceilings, carpet, all those things that have got big numbers, big multipliers. If you're building a residence that's got 300 rooms, or doors is a big deal. And those things should be concentrated on. And let's say you're going to specify a color of glass. Wow, that blue is really nice, I like it, and then nobody ever says anything about it until midday, and you find out it's really expensive. So anything with big areas, big volumes should be really scrutinized early on, and then you won't have those surprises. And you can bring in, somebody like Artie and say, is this glass expensive?
Here.
Anybody, any other answers? Any other questions? We'll be mindful of our time, yes.
For any emerging professionals in our audience, are there any suggestions that any of you gentlemen could provide as to an appropriate career path for being a top estimator?
Well, mine started off, I went to college in Scotland to become a quantity surveyor, and that profession doesn't exist here or in Canada. It exists in most of the Commonwealth countries, Hong Kong and so on. And it's a really professional grounding in the construction industry, because we deal with estimating, we deal with contract law, we deal with project management, that sort of thing. But of course, not everyone has the opportunity to go to the UK or Hong Kong or Australia and learn how to be a QS. That worked for me though, I have to say. So the rest of you are SOL. But I know, we have great, we actually have recruited a number of excellent candidates from, as I say, I'm from Seattle, the UW Construction Management Program. they do a really good job of extracting the creative aspect of someone's cerebellum and creating estimators up there. We like that part of them, and yeah, the CM projects, CM programs that we done, Oregon State, places like that, I mean, they create great people with a great interest and a really broad outlook on the construction profession. And those are, and the ones that are, you know, are so inclined and are exposed through, you know, working as interns at Hoffman or Turner or something like that, and really turned on by estimating, which is a relatively small number. I know that's going to surprise you, but so we get great people from those sorts of programs. We really do. We really do.
All right, with that, I'm going to thank you all, thank the panel, and as I said when I started, they're your best friends on a project.